kick off our interview today, I'm here with Polly Howard with the Children's Place. Polly, really appreciate your time and joining us today to tell us more about your organization's great work. Thank you so much for making time for this today. Could
Glad
we
to be
start
here.
off by, could we start off just tell us a little bit more about the Children's Place, and particularly for our audience? I know a little bit from past conversations with you, of course, but I think we'll have folks listening to this in the future that don't know anything. So we'd love to just hear generally the general introduction for what your organization does.
Perfect. Yeah. The Children's Place here in Kansas City, Missouri. We've been here in existence for 46 years. For nearly 5 decades, our focus has been mental health with young children. The ages we serve is pretty much birth up to the age of 8, and we do that through a few key programs. We talk a lot about day treatment, which is our most intensive program. It's going to look, you'll walk through it, it's going to look very much like a preschool, but it is very focused on the social and emotional development of the kids that are in that program. We have about 45 kids here every day, Monday through Friday, year round. And those kiddos have come to us because they have, one, likely they're in the children's division, have been removed from the home in some way. They have experienced developmental delays as a result of the trauma. All of the kids that we treat and see have experienced some sort of traumatic event. When we talk about, really, that's a variety of different traumas here at the Children's Place, but what we typically see the most cases, abuse, neglect are the big, and then we also see a lot of kiddos who, as a result of their caregiver having struggles of their own with substance abuse, and then we also see a high volume of their own mental health challenges. So as a result of that, and I mentioned we've been around some time, this last year, we have also added adult mental health therapy. We've never done that before. We're about a year and a half into that new program, but what we discovered is that we couldn't help the little people in the relationship unless we equipped the bigs with some key resources. So we have a counseling center. So that looks very typical to an appointment-based therapy. We also do really our high volume, we'll see anywhere right around 400 children and families per year will come through the doors of the Children's Place. But where we see the high volume, and this is more or less a one and done, is through our assessments program, where they get referred to us from a variety. A lot of them do come through the Children's Division or other community partners, the Children's Hospital here or other agencies. Refer the kiddos here, and we'll do a developmental assessment and determine what their needs are from that point on. Due to the trauma, we are seeing high volume of severe speech delay, and that has been a piece of our program that we've expanded. Not only do we offer the mental health services and the counseling and the therapy, but then we've also added through the years speech and language pathology, as well as occupational therapists. So that way we can get those kids up to speed developmentally, so we can do much of the work on the mental health side. We support families in addition, while the child is our client and we are centered around everything about the child. We really try to also support the families. We have a parent educator on staff, and she really works hand in hand with those families, teaching them how to properly care for a kiddo who has experienced trauma. A lot of times that might be a biological parent. It might be a grandparent who is now raising a child that they didn't expect to be doing so. It might be a foster family or a newly adopted. Our families here are very diverse, but we really try to help arm the big people in the best way to take care of the little people. But our focus is first and foremost mental health for kids, and here specifically under the age of 8 years old.
Yeah, wow, what fantastic and incredibly important work. I was curious as you were talking about, yeah, what the age range
Mhm.
is. So like how long do you said the children are your clients, how long do they stay engaged? Like do they move on out of the program at age 8, or the relationships continue longer, or how does
What
that
does
tend to
that
work?
look like? Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Well, in the day treatment program, which is our most intensive program, they are
yeah,
here on average about 18 months.
okay,
And that during that time frame, they're either completing their treatment goals and are moving on. The idea would be to help them get to a point where they could function in a typical daycare setting. A lot of our
yeah,
kids naturally age out of the program when they go to kindergarten.
yeah,
So
okay,
we are working with, and we've have some programs that we are really trying to build up to have more of that partnership with the school districts where those kiddos will start kindergarten so that it will be a gentle handoff and say, okay, this is what we found with like being aware as they're moving through the educational process.
yeah,
Now, those children could come back to us and see us at the counseling center where it wouldn't be as
okay,
intensive every day. They could come in a couple of times a month and get that dosing of your kind of typical therapy. Our focus and our modality is play therapy, which does look much different compared to adult therapy. And
yeah,
in fact, that's why we only go up to the age of 8. Our therapists are trained in theraplay, play therapy, any type of attachment type work. And really beyond the age of 8 or 9, those modalities shift. And
yeah.
so that is not necessarily our expertise.
Yeah, that
So,
makes sense. Can you tell us a little bit more about the broader community? I'm a fellow Midwesterner, so I know
mhm.
Kansas City, the
Right,
area, but for other folks, again, our network, the folks that'll see this in the future are coast to coast. Can you just
right.
give us a little more description of the broader community that the organization exists in and serves?
Sure. Well, we, serve right. A majority of the work that we do is really centered around Kansas City, Missouri, specifically
Mhm.
Jackson County. We
Okay.
do stretch over the state line where we straddle Missouri, Kansas, but really most of our work is because we're so heavily tied to the children's division.
Yeah.
The kiddos, several of our programs are, for instance, most of the children that we see are tied, our funding is tied to Medicaid dollars, or
Okay.
um, a bulk of the families are at or below the poverty level. We
Yeah.
don't turn anyone away. Um, and that's much of like our fundraising goes to support. If you would look at our business model, it doesn't make a lot of sense because the work that we do is really expensive.
Yeah.
But this is a very underrepresented population, especially when you're talking mental health. I don't want to say it's new necessarily, but I think we are really working hard to remove the stigma. And, we see culturally some segments of our population are more open to mental health therapy or their child receiving therapy or they themselves. So that is a bit
Yeah.
of kind of the breakdown in the demographic focus of who we serve. We
Yeah.
do we access to services is can be a barrier and is a barrier for a lot of those families. And so we have taken on as an agency, we provide transportation.
Mhm.
So those kids that are here every day, Monday through Friday, do ride a bus. The
Okay.
caregiver could bring them in, but I think we
Yeah.
have all but maybe two
Yeah.
ride a bus. We pick them up
Yeah.
at their homes or daycares. They
Well,
bus here. You get on the bus. It's not like a typical like school age, because
yeah.
of the kids are so young in that program. The youngest would be like 18 months,
Oh, wow.
up to like 5 or 6 who are coming here
Yeah.
on their own, but they all
Yeah.
have car seats. So we have a bus driver and a monitor on the bus, and they
Yeah.
help so that they arrive safely and then we return them home. We
Yeah.
also, on Fridays, send home backpacks full of food for
That's
the
great.
children and their families to have food over
Yeah.
the weekend. And then anytime we are closed for an extended amount of time, for instance, over the holidays, we send
Yeah.
extra to just
Yeah.
help alleviate some of those stressors with the families.
Yeah. No, that's terrific. What is your role with the organization? What do you focus on?
Sure. I am the Vice President of Development and Communications, and so we are the fundraising marketing arm of the agency. And I've been with the agency for not quite 6 years, and I have seen a lot of change in the funding breakdown.
Yeah. Yeah.
We're about a $5 million agency.
Hmm.
When I started, we were development was responsible for about 1.5 million of
Okay.
a roughly $3 million budget.
Yeah.
Um, we saw much higher levels coming from the state, from Medicaid dollars. The
Yeah.
system is shifting and changing.
Yeah.
So there's been an elevated push to do more fundraising. So now my
Hmm.
team, we are responsible for about 3.7, $3.8 million, and that is roughly 70 to 75% of the total budget for
Wow.
the agency.
Wow. That's a huge responsibility. I was
So,
wondering, as you were talking earlier about the mix of government versus private funding
right.
and donors for
Yes.
this, that is quite a shift in a relatively short amount of time
Yes.
as well.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, during that time, we have completed a capital campaign. We were in a much, much smaller location.
Yeah.
We repurposed a facility. We're about 3 times the physical
Oh,
size
wow. Yeah.
of an agency, and we're really looking, how do we expand services? We've grown. We've um, said we would likely never hit over 50. We've hit the 50 employee mark and launched past
Yeah.
it. Our focus really moving forward is improving access, looking at ways to serve more children, and we're in the process of this fall, we'll launch a therapy bus,
Hmm.
which will go out into the communities, and we'll partner with early education centers. And the
Hmm.
bus, we have 2 therapists hired, and they
Wow.
will go on the bus. It will be out every day, and it
Wow.
will park at one of our partners, and they will do therapy
Yeah.
on the bus. So
Yeah.
alleviating
Interesting.
that transportation but barrier
Yeah.
for a lot of families. So we're excited
Yeah.
about where we're going with that.
Yeah. That's a great initiative.
So
What do you have? I guess I'm curious how do you have examples of outcomes from it with kids that have been served in the past? I mean, do you have alumni because the organization has been around a while? Like, how do you track the impact and outcome that comes from? I mean, these are incredible services. How do you measure that in the long term, and how do you find and share stories of what
yeah,
that does in these kids' lives as well?
I will be honest, it is a very challenging piece because
Yeah.
I think it's shifted. I think we have a few more opportunities now than what we did previously,
Yeah.
because kids are wards of the state. We
Yeah.
are very limited in the type of contact that we have beyond when they
Yeah.
leave. We have about a
Yeah.
6 month, a few years ago, we had about a 6 month window that we
Yeah.
could really keep in contact with caseworkers, or, a lot of the kiddos were in foster families, kind of your traditional
Yeah.
foster families. Now we're seeing, and this has been a real push with the state of Missouri to reunite kids with their biological families, but that might
Yeah.
not be bio mom or dad. That would be like
Somebody
grandmas
else.
and
Yeah.
aunts and uncles. So I see that changing, perhaps that we'll be able to keep contact because
Hmm.
they are with families. Now, when
Hmm.
they're with a foster family, necessarily, it's really, really hard to track. But what's interesting enough is, like, our outcomes, we do caregiver satisfaction surveys, and
Hmm.
what it is, if it is not 100%, it is 98% of families say they have seen progress within their kids who are in our services.
Wow. Yeah.
Um, and then, we also, since we are relatively small, while we want to be able to serve more,
Yeah.
I really kind of compare the work that we do to the intensive care unit of a hospital,
Yeah.
where, you don't want volumes of folks coming through. We want to be able to
Yeah.
focus one-on-one. So, for
Yeah.
instance, I'm going to tell you a real quick story. We had a family here. Um, they were fostering the children, and then were moving through the system, and they adopted. And there's a set of twins, and then three other singletons, if you may.
Hmm.
So this family adopted, really went from 0 to 5 children in a
Wow.
relatively short amount of time. Um, 3 of those children, have to think about this, were in our program in some way. They
Okay.
might have been in the day treatment, or we may have seen them through outpatient. Through this time, and I mean, they were very, very close to the agency. The father and the family unexpectedly passed away.
Oh, wow.
So the mother called one of our therapists and said, "This has happened. I haven't even told the children yet. How do
Wow.
I walk through a conversation
Yeah.
with children who have already been through so much?"
Yeah.
Our therapist went out on site, met them in their home, and walked the mother through how to have these conversations. And the ages of the children were various levels, from I think 2 was the youngest to probably 9 or 10.
Yeah.
So, that I share that example to just demonstrate that, like, the work we do is so individualized and specialized.
Hmm.
It's not a one size fits all approach. It is very much a case by case basis,
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
we work. And we're very
Yeah.
proud that, like,
Yeah.
we know our families.
Yeah. I like the intensive care
Yes.
example that you mentioned as well. Like it's
Right.
very personal, it's very deep. It's
Yeah.
really serving critical needs to the people that really need it, kids that really need it the
Right.
most as well. What what are some of the challenges that the organization faces? I mean, you kind of highlighted a couple of things already in your
Right.
commentary, but how would you answer that generally? Like, what are the biggest challenges that you're working through and the organization's working through as a whole right now?
Right. I've kind of talked about it a few times, but I think organ organizationally, probably one of the biggest challenges is just the restructuring of the child welfare system in the state of
Yeah.
Missouri.
Yeah.
While so much of, like, the focus of what they're doing for families is really positive, and reuniting and trying to keep children tie to their families is good
Hmm.
for but where it's challenging is, in a case where, and I kind of touched on it briefly early, when you have, say, a grandparent, for instance, they've raised their kids, they're living life, and then all of a sudden they have one, too many children that
Hmm.
they are now responsible to care. Once they go out of the system, that grandparent caregiver doesn't get any financial support from the state, whereas like a traditional foster family might. So
Yeah. Yeah.
we are doing some work to try to figure out, like, how do we make that known,
Yeah.
knowing so many of our families are struggling with that. And we
Yeah.
um have added a lot more, I don't want to, basic needs help, just because that's where we know when families get stressed,
Yeah.
that's where things happen. And so we want to
Yeah.
do our best to remove those stressors. And so we're starting to see a lot more, like, we have a hope fund where, if we know a family, like, we had a family come to us and they were evicted and
Mm.
we're going to literally be on the street. And
Yeah.
one of the kiddos was in our program, so it came to us. We had been working with their therapist, and we're not trying to be that entity that will take care of the problem, but we know that, okay, you need a week, like, we would pay for their hotel stay for a week to
Yeah.
get, and then during that
Yeah.
time, we do have our assessment, our intake coordinator would work to find other resources in the community that
Yeah.
could help them on a longer term basis.
Yeah.
So I see that challenge. And then, of course, it's a fundraising side is
Yeah.
always a challenge. We're seeing a lot of our funders, over the last 2 or 3 years, many of our large funders are shifting their focus areas. And I really think that's happening across the country in many ways
Mm-hmm.
with like the focus that they had for their funds
Mm-hmm.
are changing. And we
Mm-hmm.
may or may not necessarily fit. So we've had to
Mm-hmm.
become creative and look for other opportunities that had been there for years
Yeah.
that we're having to supplement those dollars now.
Yeah. Such a complex and changing landscape, I
Right.
think, is a theme I'm hearing from you as you talk
Yeah,
through
yeah,
all
yeah.
the moving parts that you and your team deal with around this. Wow. Yeah. How do people, listeners to this, how do they learn more about the Children's Place? What would you suggest? How do they learn more? How do they support you in the future? What can you share for that?
Right. Well, check out our website. It's very children'splacekc.org.
Yeah.
We'd love to go check us out there. That seems to be social media. Follow us on social media. And I mean, we just really love to tell the story. You know, it's interesting enough. We've been around for almost 5 decades, but we still hear a lot about we don't know about the agency. So
Yeah.
like the opportunity to speak, and I realize there's a lot of folks outside of the Kansas City area, but we really want people to know about what we do
Yeah.
and the focus, how it is on mental health for children
Yeah.
and how that work is important.
Yeah.
And if we can get to those kids specifically under the age of 5, science tells us we can rewire their brains
Wow.
and really improve their life outcomes as we go. That trauma, in many cases, you know, we have speech therapists and occupational therapists on staff.
Yeah.
You know, when you have a child who has not developed their speech appropriately, when they get to kindergarten, like they're
Yeah.
already behind.
Yeah.
So our goal is to at least get the child to that biologic where their developmental age is caught up to their biological age or
Yeah.
close so that they
Yeah.
can be successful in school and beyond.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
those really the first 5 years of life, you know, we talk about it across the board in so many areas, but it is
Mm-hmm.
extremely critical to lifetime
Mm-hmm.
outcomes.
Yeah. What a noble cause and incredibly important work that your organization does.
Well, thank
One
you.
last question, so maybe a little more broadly, our audience with Grateful Giving includes many folks that want to do more to make an impact in their communities and our country and society as a whole. Do you have any general advice that you would share? I mean, you work every day in the impact space, but for folks that are generally looking for ways to make more of an impact in their own communities, whether it's Kansas City or anywhere else, any
Mhm.
general advice that you would offer to that type of audience?
Yeah, you know, I think it's very much just listen, be aware.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of times people go into like thinking they know the problem.
Yeah.
And when you come to find out, when you dig a little bit deeper, ooh, that may not be the problem that needs to be solved. There may
Yeah.
be a one-off that is
Yeah.
kind of a byproduct of that initial problem or issue at hand. So I think
Yeah.
it is very much listening and I think just supporting those people.
Yeah.
And you know, and as a fundraiser, I'm always going to talk about the financial piece, but I also think there's the volunteer side or the advocacy piece. You know, that is
Hmm.
something that, you know, with so much change happening at the state level, we as an
Hmm.
agency are looking, how do we insert ourselves in the conversation? So that's where I
Yeah.
look to anyone listening, think
Yeah.
about like how you vote, how you interact
Hmm.
with our systems that are in place. How are the
Hmm.
things that are important to you? You know,
Hmm.
if you can't write a check, um,
Hmm.
how can you use your voice to
Hmm.
elevate the cause and the
Yeah.
work and the challenges associated with that? So
Yeah.
I
That's a
think
great
those
point.
are those are some very, you know, kind of broad ways I think that I would tell people they could help. So
Yeah. That's terrific. Well, again, I appreciate your time and admire the nobleness of the cause that you and your
thank you, Matt.
organization do and the children that you serve. We've walked through my whole list of questions here, so I think it's a great opportunity for folks to learn more about the Children's Place and hopefully support you in your work. And it's great to see you again. Appreciate you taking
Yeah.
time for the conversation today as
Well,
well.
thank
Thank you so
you.
much.
Thank you for letting us share the story on this platform. So I appreciate being able to talk broadly.
Yeah,
So thank you.
thank you so much. Have a good rest of your day. Take
You
care.
too.